for a look at what auto should focus on in this idea of a green restart. We're joined now by Tom Rand, managing partner at ArcTern Ventures. Tom, thanks for joining us. And let's start there. When we have Justin Trudeau and we have the new Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, saying the environment, that green issues will be at the top of the agenda, how do you actually execute on that in trying to recover from a pandemic?
Well, I think there's lots of opportunity. I think the first piece to note is that any approach to climate risk that operates at a scale relevant to reducing that risk was always going to have to be centered around the finance department. Nibbling around the edges, viewing climate response as kind of an environmental issue was never substantial enough. And so I think it's very good news that at least there's going to be a clear effort to have the finance ministry directly engaged in figuring out ways to reboot the economy in a way that allows us to take advantage of what's probably the last best shot at rewiring the economy to sort of move into a low carbon state. So I think it's very good news. In terms of the details, there's every lobby group that I know of is in Ottawa banging their drum. So there's an enormous amount of noise out there. I think it's going to be some combination of infrastructure, and it can figure out some tax rules to change. I've advocated for a green bank where you leverage public and private sector activity to really move capital into the markets. But we'll have to wait and see what the details are. But at a high level, it being thought about by the finance minister is very good news.
Now, Tom, I imagine that in the energy industry, some of the traditional players, they don't know exactly what it means yet either, but they might be approaching this with caution. Can it be an opportunity for them, or is it as feared in some quarters that this is a government that sort of wants to keep driving them to the margins?
I don't think anything that's happening to our traditional energy players has anything to do with the government's efforts to help or hinder them, to be honest. We have very expensive oil in this country, and the world is moving off oil. And so those are economic forces that have been in play for a decade now. They will continue to accelerate into the market. So people like to blame Ottawa for the troubles in our oil and gas sector. It's got nothing to do with Ottawa. It's got everything to do with economic signals, global competitiveness, and so on. So I think that's a tired old refrain that we should move away from and begin to think about how we position Canada to take advantage of the leads that we have in clean tech and clean energy. We have some big players. We have some very promising technology startups. And I think thinking about that as the future of energy is the right way to think about it.
When I think, Tom, about regional, strengths, obviously we talk about the energy industry, the traditional one, we talk about Alberta, Saskatchewan to a certain degree as well, Newfoundland. If we're going to have this sort of green revolution and this green restart, are there certain geographies that are already ahead of the pack? Will there be areas of this country that are going to be left behind?
Well, I think it depends on how you design it. I don't think any part of this country is immune to these technological forces that are changing the energy landscape. We're electrifying transport, renewable energy are 90% cost reductions. Every part of the country needs to find a way to play there. Now, you're not turning off oil overnight. No one pretends that's possible. What we want to think about is continuing to double down on that economic bet. I think that's a dead man walking. I think we should think very hard about stranded assets and the future of the oil and gas sector. But again, the forces that are bringing that into play have nothing to do with the government. Now, I think oil and gas workers need to be treated fairly and like any other industry as they recover from COVID. You think about workers and you think about transition and all that kind of stuff. I think they should be treated on par with everybody else. Think about the future of energy and the role Canada plays in the economy in the year 2050, 2060, 2070. It's in a very different direction than what we've been talking about for the past 10 years, which is defending the incumbents and moaning about how the oil and gas sector is under fire by governments, and they're not.
Tom, I only got about a minute left, but before we let you go, people in the private sector get worried that government will step in with a heavy hand and try to pick winners and losers. Is it important they set up a framework, but not necessarily try to handle it too aggressively? What should their strategy be?
Yeah, ultimately, I think the role of public sector is to set up the guide wires by which market forces move. I think it needs to be aggressive. But look, we've picked winners before, right? The fact that the tar sands are economically viable at all was the result of the Alberta government putting a lot of money into that sector. China owns the solar sector because they decided to target it. They're now owning the EV sector because they decided to target it. I don't think we should be shy about finding out what our strengths are and really doubling down on those strengths. But I think it takes some finesse to ensure that you're playing with market forces and not against them.
Tom, it's always great to get your insights. Thanks so much for joining us. Tom Rand is a managing partner of ArcTern Ventures.